The honor to announce that the games of the 31st Olympiad are awarded to the city of Rio de Janeiro.
Every 2 years, the world has its eyes on a showcase of peak human performance, the Olympics. Each country cheers on its athletes with ferocity, whilst the athletes themselves display a lifetime of training. The 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio drew a viewership of 3.6 billion people, almost half the world's population. 11,000 athletes represented over 200 nations for monetary compensation and national pride. Over 70,000 volunteers helped host the Games, and over 85,000 security personnel were hired. The International Olympic Committee, the IOC, claims on their website that the 2016 Rio Games provided the best possible environment for peak performances. But despite this claim, the magnitude of effort, and the fanfare, the Rio Olympics harmed Brazil in many ways. Which begs the question, are the Olympics worth all the trouble for all of the harm it does? By looking at how the Olympics displaced its people, the economic and environmental impacts, it can be understood why that the Olympics do more harm than good, why the future of the Olympics is at risk.
The 2016 Summer Rio Olympics caused the displacement of many Brazilian citizens. Displacement affected Jane Nascimento de Olive, a brave elderly woman who took a stand against powerful construction companies and the Brazilian government to keep her home. Jane lived in the Vila Outrodomo neighborhood, which was labeled as one of the safest drug-free neighborhoods in Rio. But all that changed in 2015 when her right to live in her home was revoked. During this time, she received a multitude of eviction notices and threats. Her telephone line, electricity, and water supplies were cut. And worse than that, she witnessed the police using harmful force such as tear gas, rubber bullets, and batons to remove people from their homes. As the days passed, she saw her neighbors' homes get torn down. More than 800 families, which was 90% of the original population of Vila Outrodomo, were displaced. This happened because the neighborhood is located outside of the main Olympic Park, and the Brazilian government wanted to gentrify the area, making the city look more westernized for foreign athletes and travelers. Also, the construction company planned on building accommodations for athletes that would later be listed on the home market for them to gain a profit. The Olympic Games are supposed to bring unity, but instead it brought crisis to the citizens of Brazil, taking their homes with little to no compensation, pushing them into poverty. The government used the hosting of high-profile events over the past decade to justify the relocation of urban poor citizens from prime real estate locations to build housing for the upper class. Thus, the Olympics is to blame for displacement, property speculation, and gentrification.
Next, let's dive in on the economic benefits of hosting the Olympic Games, such as broadcast revenue, sponsorship, employment, ticket sales, and increased tourism. The main sources of generated revenue for hosting city is majorly derived from ticket sales, broadcasting revenue, and sponsorship. The influence of tourism is very hard to quantify because it's impossible to gather information on each tourist's habits and behaviors of spending their money. The economic benefits will be greatly influenced by the size of Olympic investment, since it's tremendously involved a massive amount of tourism, active and great promotion of the hosting city and country, and a great amount of revenue and taxes. Furthermore, cities hosting the Olympic can acquire a great number of jobs due to infrastructure advancement that benefits the city in the future. For example, Rio constructed 15,000 new hotel rooms to accommodate newly coming tourists. Sochi invested almost 42.5 billion to construct non-sports infrastructure for the 2014 Olympics. Beijing spent over 22.5 billion to construct roads, airports, and railways, and almost 11.25 billion on environmental cleanup. Lastly, thousands of sponsors, media, athletes and spectators typically visit its host city for 6 months before and 6 months after the Olympics, which brings in additional revenue.
The costs for hosting the Olympics are constantly debated. In most financial impact studies, the financial benefits are measured by job creation and visitor spending via tourism, and these studies invariably project large inflows of money that will have a long-term positive effect on the economy. However, the financial drawbacks of hosting the Olympics, such as treating costs as benefits, are rarely addressed in studies, thus creating an illusion that the financial benefits of hosting the Olympics outweigh the costs. According to a study conducted by Claremont University, a host city can spend hundreds of millions of dollars to put on the Olympics. The process of bidding alone costs $100,000 in application fees, and the city must pay an additional $500,000 if it is accepted as a candidate city. Then the candidate city has to pay for the on-site inspection, as well as all formal responses and impact studies, which costs millions of dollars. The host city must then again dedicate hundreds of millions of dollars for marketing, advertising, logistics, infrastructure revision, building future amenities, all to impress international investors and the International Olympic Committee, thus often going over the intended budget. Another negative economic impact for the host city is the failure to recognize opportunity costs. Olympics force host cities to create expensive, over-specialized sports infrastructures and buildings that often fall into disuse. The opportunity costs for these projects are enormous, with millions that could have been spent on public investment, health, education, defense, and more. Using Rio's Olympics as an example, the 700 million athletes village for the 2016 Games was turned into the luxury apartments that are now shuttered, and the Olympic Park is basically vacant after failing to attract a buyer.
With hosting an international event like the Olympic Games, no matter how many environmentally cautious decisions or efforts are put in place, it still takes a toll on the environment. There are many problems to talk about, but I'm only going to highlight a few of them. To start off, the most common way athletes, spectators, and staff come from all around the world into a host city is by air travel. And during the Olympic game period, the amount of CO2 emissions and air fuel used rises. In 2016's Rio Games, it was estimated 28,500 athletes and staff flew into the country, and that's not even including spectator numbers. Another major problem is the waste produced, either from the construction of the facilities or the cleanup after the event. In 2016's Rio game, it was estimated that 17,000 tons of waste were produced after the game. And in 2014 Sochi Winter Games, they saw illegal dumping of waste materials during the construction of the facilities, and this harmed animals and habitats in the surrounding areas. Lastly, multiple facilities have to be built at once for the games, and this means land is required, and more land is found in the forests and natural areas, which has to be destroyed to make room. In 2018's Winter Pyeongchang Games, they had to cut down over 10,000 forest trees that were over 500 years old just to make room for the Alpine Center. South Korea did pledge they were gonna replant 1,000 trees after the game, but the damage is already done.
Although the Olympics bring immeasurable pride and joy to a very select group of people, it also causes irreversible harm to the host country's peoples, finances, and environment. Increasingly, when subject to public scrutiny and a cost-benefit analysis, cities are finding it not worthwhile to bid for the Olympics. Looking to the future, it is uncertain whether the Olympics will be seen as worthwhile for all of the harm it does.